Hi everyone, what we just saw in this video is the Haka dance of the Maori people. It performed as a greeting of the visitor or to intimidate the opponents, which we shall see then in the native Hawaiian tradition. Today, we are going to talk about the immigration to the United States of the native Hawaiian. As we can see, many groups came to the United States for a variety of reasons, like for employment opportunities, to escape a violent conflict in their own countries, and even environmental problems or educational purpose, and for freedom. Our group will elaborate on the information about this group, Native Hawaiian, who are they, how and why they came, and the way they assimilate to the US. We will talk about them all in this presentation. Please enjoy.
First, we must not confuse the large immigrations of those Chinese, Japanese, Filipinos, and Koreans whose descendants are on Hawaii's island with the native Hawaiian. Hawaii is the last state who joined the United States in 1959, with residents include native Hawaiians as well. So, who are we talking about? Trace back to the 3rd century, the original people in this island are the Aboriginal settlers of the Hawaiian Islands, also known as Kanaka Maoli. Their descendants were originally a Polynesian people in Hawaii. There were two waves of the Aboriginal people or descendants of Polynesians that migrated to the Hawaii Island. First, the Aboriginal people from the Marquesas Island around 400 AD, and the second wave came from Tahiti in the 9th or 10th centuries. The native Hawaiians also the majority part of the Pacific Islander groups as well. The pictures shown are the native Hawaiian school children and Hawaiian man with his two children. For Hawaii itself is the state, and Hawaii is named after its native people. It was an independent and sovereign nation, while Hawaiian is actually a culture. The native Hawaiian is a race classification used by the United States. So there are some differences between the Hawaii and the native Hawaiian. There were 37,656 identified as the native Hawaiian ancestry.
In the 2000 US Census, around 283,430 residents of the native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander ancestry were identified. And by 2010, there were around 527,000 people identified as native Hawaiian and mixed race of one or more than two races. Around 156 people identify themselves as being truly native Hawaiian. So, we will talk about the reasons that the native Hawaiian came into the United States ever since Captain James Cook discovered Hawaii, as well as where in the mainland they mostly stay. Beginning with the 18th and 19th century, the first group lived in the United States were the fur traders that had been brought by British fur traders in Honolulu, Hawaii. John Jacob Astor used the native Hawaiian to build the city infrastructure and houses, and also worked in serving the company. They were taken through the ship from Honolulu to northwestern United States or Fort Astoria in February 1811. Because PFC required a large number of laborers in agricultural work, hunting, fishing, and to explore Kamehameha I orders. They mostly came and returned to Hawaii when their contract ended, but some had been moving in Astoria colony illegally. After 1813, native Hawaiians continued to migrate to the Pacific Northwest to work for other companies such as Hudson Bay Company that also operate and store in Hawaii, which was known as the Sandwich Islands, engaging in merchant shipping to the islands between 1828 and 1859, as well as Columbia Fishing and Trading Company. The Second Coming was a small group of Polynesian Protestant students who immigrated to the United States to study theology around 1819. The religion was another incentive. Polynesian Protestant theology students from the islands such as Hawaii, Guam, Tonga, or American Samoa, which include the native Hawaiian immigrate to the United States to look for an education. From the 1830s, other groups of the native Hawaiian arrived on California shore, where they were traders and formed great communities. And during the California Gold Rush, many native Hawaiians migrated to California to work as miners. Many came overland and arrived by sea on California Trail and Guerra River Trail.
Those prior immigration of native Hawaiian was not allowed until 1873. The first native Hawaiians were given permission from the King Lunalilo to permanently immigrate to Salt Lake City, Utah of the United States. The first immigrants were Kiha Kawa and Hana Pukahi. Kiha was adopted by Mormon missionary President George N. Baker immediately upon arrival, making Kiha Kawa the first native Hawaiian to become a U.S. citizen in 1873. The Mormon believers believe that this is the promised land. They came here to help build Mormon church, and the first colony of the Hawaiian Mormons was established in Utah in 1889. So, where are they? The majority of native Hawaiians were living in the state of Hawaii, about 2/3, and the rest were spreading among other states around the American Southwest, especially in California. Small groups of Mormons were settling for a religious purpose since 1910 in Salt Lake City, Utah. The U.S. illegally occupied Hawaii in 1893 at the time of Queen Liliuokalani. Hawaii was first a U.S. territory and later became a state in 1959. This has made oceanian immigration diverse in the United States. The U.S. Marines from the USS Boston, along with the U.S. sailors and U.S. government minister John L. Stevens, land at Honolulu Harbor, have been effectuating an illegal coup against Queen Liliuokalani at that time. This brought many of the U.S. and European businessmen, immigrants, and the tourists all over the place. In the following years, native Hawaiians were colonized by the largest superpower in the world. This systematic suppression of Hawaiian culture and language, like children were punished in school for speaking Hawaiian. Moreover, people at that time had no resistance to influenza, smallpox, measles, or whooping cough. The native Hawaiians were nearly wiped out by the diseases that those sailors brought to the island. After the overthrow, native Hawaiians tried to fight back. Requests of an official investigation to claim that the overthrow had been illegal, as well as launching a petition to stop formal annexation of Hawaii to the U.S. They thought that if the Congress realized that the native Hawaiian did not want to be part of the U.S., they would restore independence to the Hawaii. Later, Queen Liliuokalani traveled to Washington, D.C. to present her protest and the petition to the Congress, which took them months by sea and land.
Beginning with the native Hawaii culinary, along with the early Polynesian settlers, on their arrival, the settlers grew taros, bananas, coconut, breadfruit, as meats were eaten less often than fruit, vegetable, and seafood, as well as some do imports and raise pork, chicken, poi dog, together with popular condiments that include salt, seaweed, sugarcane, in which was used as both as sweet and medicine. And the native Hawaii cultural traditions. For men did all of the cooking, and food for women was cooked in separate meals, in which they both ate meals separately per ancient kapu or taboos, another word of separating the gender of meals. Imu was a Hawaiian pit oven that used to steam whole pigs, breadfruit, banana, sweet potato, basically an underground steam cooker.
on top of all these sweet potatoes. And more rocks. They need my help. This is a whole layered oven. It starts with foliage, rocks, sweet potatoes, foliage, rocks, and then the pig on top. This is our final product right here.
Now, let's talk about food. Kalua is a pig that cooked underground in an imu. Poi is made from cooked, mashed, and sometimes lightly fermented taro, a starch staple for the native Hawaiian diets.
You can just smell the aroma of this corn that was cooked in an underground oven.
Poke, a raw marinated fish or other seafood salad that made with sea salt, seaweed, coconut oil, more recently with soy sauce and sesame oil.
Sesame seeds, a splash of sesame oil, a little bit more than a splash, and our signature sauce, which is called tamura sauce.
Ooh, what's in that tamura sauce?
I can pretty much only tell you that there's shoyu in it. I can't tell you any more than that. And that is all she wrote on our tamura special.
Squid lo'u is made with coconut milk, cooked with taro leaf in a pot, sometimes has a creamy consistency. The last one is kolulu, a pudding dessert made from grated taro corn and coconut milk that is baked in an imu with a fudge-like consistency. The honeihu, or the touching of noses. It is a traditional method of greeting one another, whether it's a man and woman, two men or two women. It allows both people to exchange breath, which is the supremely important life force in Hawaiian understanding, and also share some sense and convert a close-knit relationships. The last one is paina or aha'aina, were basically brought together group of people to enjoy delicious food. To clarify, it is a tradition when a woman was to have her first child, her husband started raising a pig for the aha'aina, in which to celebrate the birth of child.
Let's look at the contribution that originated in Hawaii and then appear in the American cultures, in which specifically sports. Beginning with the outrigger canoe paddling, it became an American and a world sport, as the canoe paddling was not only the way that native Hawaiians discovered the Hawaii, it was part of their everyday lifestyle. The paddling was a transportation at the time for one island to another, and has been a tradition of the native Hawaiian culture until people from all over the world had learned about Hawaiian culture. That in the 20th century, outrigger canoe paddling has become an international sport. Another sport that has influence from Hawaiian culture was surfing. Surfing has been a cultural activity on the island since the ancient times, and early Hawaiian surfing competitions were used to settle disputes between islanders as well. It represents far more to the native than just an entertainment sport or leisure activity. Religiously, when a surfer entered the water, they would pray to the god for safety and success as they attempt to challenge the god of the ocean. Moving on to the religion, the polytheistic animistic belief is a Hawaiian religion, the indigenous religious beliefs and practice of the native Hawaiian. The belief of many deities and spirits that also live in non-human beings and objects such as the other animals, the waves, and the sky. Traditional Hawaiian religions is unrelated to the modern New Age practice, which rapidly grew in the Western world during the 1970s. It's also known as Huna, that for the philosophers in the 1936 is used to describe the fundamental nature of reality, including the relationship between the mind and matter. Moreover, American people had localized the traditional Hawaiian belief in the movie Moana. The film tells the story of Moana, who is chosen by the ocean itself to reunite the nation. They believe in goddess Tifiti. They represent in the Polynesian village and also use a Maoli language in the film. Today, Hawaiian religious practices are protected by the American Indian Religious Freedom Act. The population in Hawaii and those native people have suffered all the familiar horror of the contact. Since the arrival of Captain Cook, for 200 years of a massive depopulation, landlessness, Christianization, economic and political marginalization, and poor health and educational profiles. When the United States military invaded Hawaii Island in 1893 and overthrew the constitutional monarchy, they became part of the permanent military camp for the American Empire. Entering the U.S. as a territory in the 1900s, Hawaii became a white planter outpost while their Islanders were in decline. Providing missionary descended sugar baron in the island and imperialist American on the continent, with their expanding territory in the Pacific. Today, Hawaiians continue to suffer the effect of Haole colonization, or who are not native Hawaiian or Polynesian specifically mean the whites. Hawaiian language was banned in the 1896, resulting in several generations of Hawaiian. Many Hawaiian descendants can only speak English. Land and water have been taken for the military bases, resorts, and urbanization, plantation, agriculture. The country was overrun by missionaries and capitalists, adventurers, and loads of tourist settlers. Urbanization brought an influx of rich Haole from America. Unlike tourists, these people who want to live in Hawaii transform those animal crop farms into upper income development. For example, Americans westernized the native Hawaiian Lau to create profit from tourists coming to Hawaii. The American war with Japanese involved Hawaiian people in these incidents, since the Pearl Harbor attack and Niihau incidents, which was then the pilot crash-landed the fighter aircraft on the Hawaiian island in Niihau. After participating in the attack of Pearl Harbor, the native Hawaiian residents were initially unaware of the attack of both incidents. After the Pearl Harbor, Hawaii spent 3 years under martial law. Eventually, in the 1976, Hawaiians were landing on Kauolawi Island to protest in its use of military bombing range since the Second World War. Also, if the children spoke of the international language of Hawaiian, they would be severely punished. In the 1906, the International Policy and Methodological Plan of Americanization began. This plan sought to wipe out Hawaiian kingdom's cultures through creating a new mindset in the school of children throughout the islands. The purpose was to make the children believe that they were real Americans. There was only English language that could be spoken, and they had to study American history. The American flag was raised in the local Hawaiian school. Moreover, they were forced to salute, which was to raise their hand and swear, "We give our hands and our heart to God and our country, one language, one flag. Then this policy of denationalization began. It had become widely spread throughout Hawaii. However, it had a devastating effect on the Hawaiian people as they start to feel like a stranger in their own countries, and if the children weren't Americanized, they would not be allowed to attending the high school or enter the workforce.
Let's focus on the law that specifically targeting them. After 1893, oligarchy government controlled by the Committee of Safety under President Sanford Barado and Queen Liliuokalani is imprisoned. In 1896, Act 57, Section 30 became the law in the Republic of Hawaii. The law established English as the medium language in all public schools. The law did not really ban the language to spoken, but it required students to speak English in order to continue on their progress. So, President McKinley signs the New Land Resolution, which exiled Hawaii to the United States. In 1900, the United States Congress passed the Organic Act, which was to establish the territory of Hawaii and to provide a constitution and government on their territory. Later on, they established Hawaiian Homes Commission Act or HSCA, showing the special relationship between the United States and Native Hawaiians, as they reserved land for the natives, known as Hawaiian homelands. The Congress passed the Hawaii Admission Act in 1959, established the state of Hawaii as the fifth state of further benefit on the territory. However, this act includes the betterment of the conditions of the native Hawaiians, as defined by the Hawaiian Home Commission Act in 1921, as well as the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, that create better conditions of the native Hawaiians, and its principle was the performance, development, and coordination of programs and activities in public relating to the native Hawaiians. The constitutional amendments also affirm the native Hawaiian traditional rights, assure their basic rights, declare the Hawaiian language as one of two official state languages, and require Hawaiian educational program in the public school. The United States Public Law 103 to 150, as the Apology Bill, is signed by President Bill Clinton, apologizing for the United States' role in the overthrow and for the deprivation of the rights of the native Hawaiians to self-determination. The U.S. Senator Akaka support the Native Hawaiian Government and Reorganization Act, or NHGRA, for reorganizing of a Native Hawaiian governing entity within the federal law, and providing for the federal recognition of the reorganized the Native Hawaiian governing entity.
The oversimplification of the Hawaiian culture criticized by the American give Hawaiian American a hard time. In the 1919, David and Linda Ray and a group of the young girls performed a traditional hula dance in front of the court. They reacted in an ignorant way toward their dance, like it was just a dance. Until the 1930s, after the American annexed Hawaii, they became more close in contact with each other. They began to use live performance as a communication. A westernized version of hula is performed, which created an imagined intimacy between them. Americans felt a true connection to the Hawaiian cultures. However, Hawaiians were upset about their land being annexed by the United States and want no part of American culture. Lu'u is the traditional Hawaiian party or the entertainment. Usually, they serve their traditional foods such as poi, kalupua, pork, lomi salmon, opihi, and huapia. Among people from Hawaii, the concept of lu'u was often blended, as we can see in the weddings or a birthday lu'u. The king Kamehameha II even removed a separated men and women meals. He then eats with women, thus ending the Hawaiian religious couple system. This is when the Lu'u parties were first created.
Moving to some famous people of the ethnic city. Henry Opukaha. His name was usually spelled Obukia, and Henry was in Hawaiian with as Henry. He was born at Kau on the island of Hawaii in 1792. When Henry was 10, his family was murdered by Hawaiian raiders. He was one of the first native Hawaiians to become a Christian, and he was brought to the mainland in the Connecticut by Captain Caleb Britnell to have his first English lessons. Later, he inspired by many American Protestant missionaries to come to the island in the 19th century to spread Christianity. He remarked from Hawaii conversions to Christianity, and he and other Polynesians and the Native Americans returned to the island to spread the gospel. In 1860, the Foreign Mission School was founded under his administration. He also had translated the book of Genesis into Hawaiian and nearly complete a Hawaiian dictionary, grammar, and spelling book for Hawaiian people. Lydia Lili Loku Walania Kamakaiha. She was the only queen and the last sovereign monarch of the Hawaiian Kingdom before the overthrow of Hawaiian Kingdom on January 17, 1893. She born in September 2, 1838, in Honolulu on the island of Oahu. Queen Liliuokalani is known for promoting a new constitution to regain power for the monarchy and the native Hawaiian that had been lost under the Bayonet constitutions. In 1909, Liliuokalani brought a lawsuit against the United States. However, she was never successful, but she had gained recompense for Hawaii. She also wrote a song Aloha O, which is her most famous song and his common cultural symbol of Hawaii. And I will let you listen the music.
The famous people in the modern day: Israel Kaunoi Kamakawiwau, also called Broda Is or IC, one of the most recognizable Hawaiian singers. No one does not know Somewhere Over the Rainbow or What a Wonderful World. This song probably has been one of your most childhood favorites. He was born in Honolulu at Kuakini Medical Centers. The notable Hawaiian musician Moe Kale was his uncle and a major musical influence. He was part of the Hawaiian Renaissance. The band's blend of contemporary and traditional styles together, which became very popular among listeners. They had a tour from Hawaii to the United States, releasing 15 successful albums. Apart from his nice music, he was also a supporter of Hawaiian rights and the Hawaiian independence through his lyrics. For example, the lyric in his song Hawaii 78 show his care for the Hawaiian culture. Our superhero, Mr. Aquaman, is also Hawaiian. His real name is Joseph Jason Namakea Momoa. Momoa was born in 1979 in Nanakuli, Honolulu, Hawaii. He was raised in Norwalk, Iowa by his German and Irish mother. His father, though, is a native Hawaiian and Hawaiian ancient. He had once represented his culture through his audition for the role of Khal Drogo from Game of Thrones, in which he performed a haka, which is one of the intimidating Maori dance traditionally used to frighten the opponent or to welcome a visitor. Daniel Kahikina Akaka. Akaka was an American educator and politician, a member of the Democratic Party, and the first U.S. Senator of Native Hawaiian ancestry. He was born in Honolulu, Hawaii in 1924 to a Native Hawaiian descent. He also graduated from the Kamehameha Schools in 1942. He was a school teacher in Hawaii before becoming working to the government. In the Hawaiian office, Akaka later served as chair of the United States Senate Committee on Indian Affairs and the United States Senate Committee on Veteran Affairs. In 2000, he was significantly involved in the independence of Hawaii. Akaka sponsored legislation known as the Akaka Bill. The bill proposed to establish a process of U.S. federal recognition of the Hawaiian people to afford the sovereignty to the native people. The bill helped define people of Native Hawaiian as well as provide a new Hawaiian government to negotiate for lands, rights, and resources. In his later life as a senator, he gave his farewell speech with a traditional Hawaiian farewell, a hui hau, until we meet again.
Moving on for the stereotypes that they face. The first one is Hawaiian is a culture, a race, a language, and a people. Many people who live in Hawaii are Hawaiians, but if you simply move to Hawaii or you were born without Hawaiian in your blood, you are a local. Another one of the two actual Creole languages in the United States. Pidgin English is a combination of various languages that arose during the plantations era. Their accents often been made fun of and create a joke. People don't really know about Hawaiian native that much, so when they thought of the native people, they would think that of tribe or Islander, so most people had the wrong ideas about them. They will imagine themselves always wearing coconut bikini, palm teas, and drink from a pineapple. Lu is a Polynesian and ancient Hawaii ritual. It's a popular social gathering meet to unite the people of a town in celebrations from significant life events with their friends and family, basic meals from their cuisine, and entertain with hula dance or traditional Hawaiian music. The American misconception about the traditions like the traditional Lu, which was used specifically to celebrate events such as weddings, birthdays, and graduations. This one have been westernized from being a traditional party to a business that make people who want to experience the Hawaiian culture pay an exaggerate price, which is not the way they really were.
America had portrayed a false Hawaiian lifestyle by using outside influence such as Hollywood movie, music, and marketing. For example, Hawaiians didn't see this representation of their native hula dance as a true hula, since it was westernized. Anyway, today Americans had portrayed them in a popular movie, like in the example Moana. We will present about how has the native Hawaiian been portrayed in the popular media compared to the real history using Moana. First, Maui. For example, in a real demigod in the Polynesian culture who works toward the good of humankind. In the movie, Maui is portrayed as an overweight and unintelligent man, which is an offensive image of the culture. Second one, about Iceland and the coconut. Disney frequently portrays Iceland inhabitants to the coconut, which show a lack of originality. The idea of the Icelanders with coconuts is a comedy stereotype created by American TV show. Next one is Kakamora people. The portrait of the legendary Kakamora people in the movie is also unreal compared to the history. They are shown as a wild, dirty pirate wandering the ocean. In fact, they are a short-stature mythological group of people or dwarfs of Hawaii. In Polynesian myth, they do not act or look like in the movie depiction at all.